Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks for joining me today. This is a little short notice because I've been working overtime and only have a little bit of time, an hour or so today, before I have other family obligations. You will see me fighting with dogs underneath my desk the whole time through this because I am dog sitting for my mother-in-law, plus my two moron dogs are here. So, how's it going, Deb? Thanks for being here. Now, this isn't the funnest topic in the world to talk about. These mass shootings are always terrible. I did one after Christchurch, which, it was the first video I did where I got as many thumbs downs as thumbs up. I think it was because I was refusing to call out all Islam as violent, whatever. Doesn't matter, people are entitled to their opinions. I'm not going to change mine just to say what I think people want to hear. So let's talk about it. It's tough. There's a lot to talk about, both the shootings themselves and then the fallout afterwards. So the first thing that goes without saying is that my thoughts and prayers go out to everyone that was affected. No matter what we talk about here or what other politicians talk about, we're talking about large groups of people that lives will forever be changed, that nothing that anyone could say or anyone could do from here on out will ever fill the void that they have. And that's truly tragic. And I'm sorry, and I know that a lot of even what I say could come off as callous if someone like that heard. And I truly want you to know, even if you disagree with me on things I would say, that's totally fine. And you're entitled to whatever opinion you have. Hey, Cruiser. So, oftentimes you'll see people after the Parkland shooting, you saw some of these students, like I think it was David Hogg. He says some really stupid and offensive things. And I don't blame him. He suffered a tragedy, regardless if he's playing it up or whatever. I never want to be in the position he was in, or any of the other people, to be witness and think my life was in danger and things like that for a mass shooter. So I'm not going to judge him. Now, I will judge people that are supposed to be policymakers or rational thinkers that are listening to him and thinking that somehow the fact that he lived through this means that his kind of hyperbolic takes on this are more rational, because that's not the case. And before people accuse me of saying, clearly you're saying that because it benefits you politically. No, I see the same thing when, you'll see an angel mom or something like that, when I don't like these appeals to emotion, because the truth is, oftentimes we take all sides do this. They take the most extreme situation that could happen as a result of a policy and then use it to smear everyone who agrees with the less extreme versions of that policy. So maybe you're for some form of laxed immigration or open borders or something, or anything between that and a more lenient immigration system we have now. I disagree with you vehemently, but that doesn't mean that I think you're responsible if there was a murder or something like that. And I don't like playing on the emotion, saying, here's a dreamer that did something terrible, and so this means all dreamers are bad. No, that's nonsense, and it's equally nonsense when the other side does it as well. So that's my position on that. Now, aside from all that, let me first talk about, look, us that are talking right now, me, any of you that are watching this, let's be honest, we don't have huge amounts of power. We're not extremely wealthy. We can't influence people. None of us are Superman. None of us are in politics at a huge level. Even if you are, that doesn't necessarily mean you could help or change any of this. The truth is that extremism from all parties is always going to be a part of life. I don't care what political ideology or party or politician you support. There will be extremists that support that. And I mean everyone. Like, my favorite politician in my lifetime, at least that ran for president, was Ron Paul. There were probably Ron Paul extremists. Bernie Sanders, he has extremists. Jill Stein would have extremists. You probably had Ross Perot extremists. You had Jeb Bush. I'll get to that too, Dib, the shootings in Chicago and things like that. But every side's going to have extremists, right? We shouldn't rush to judge everyone based on the extremists that some party has. Now, if we start to see a pattern and we see plenty of extremists or enacting violence that come from one political ideology, then maybe it's worth discussing. But we shouldn't judge people, especially if they're expressly condemning violence. And one of the things I think that you could say, and again, I'm biased, but I think that you could say the Republican Party is even though there's plenty of things the Republicans do that I don't really care for, it seems that they've almost all but universally came out and condemned white supremacists, condemned this El Paso shooter. Now, I know there will be people that say, well, no, Trump didn't condemn white supremacists in Charlottesville. That's a lie. I've done many videos on this. He gave 3 speeches afterwards where he talked about Charlottesville, and all 3, he specifically condemned white supremacy and racism every single time. He was just talking about how he assumed there were good people that were just defending the statues. That's it. But he expressly says, but I condemn all white supremacists. I condemn the KKK, neo-Nazis, and things like that. So I'm not going to relitigate that. That's what occurred. But you see this universally come out. Yet, how many Democrats have we seen, if we're going to focus on rhetoric, that have came out and condemned the rhetoric that the ICE terrorist had from Antifa? That parroted the rhetoric of the Squad. The Squad was asked over and over again to their face, do you condemn this? Your rhetoric of calling these concentration camps. Someone took this rhetoric and attacked them as a terrorist. Go away, Cruz. I haven't seen anyone condemn that, and now we don't know with this Dayton shooter. Seems like this is someone that's on the left. There seems to be double standards with it, which I'll get to more as this goes on. But my point is just, I'm not going to blame Bernie for his supporters shooting up Steve Scalise and Republicans at a ball field. I'm not going to blame the Democrats, all Democrats, for this Antifa terrorist that was at the ICE facility. But if you are going to start blaming, then it seems at least one side's willing to say, okay, we condemn people that are taking our positions and using them to be racist. And the other side saying, no, our rhetoric can never lead to any violence whatsoever. Again, I did video after what happened when Scalise got shot in that ball field. My take was, it's not Bernie's fault at all. Even though this was a Bernie supporter. Even though he took Bernie's rhetoric serious about millions of people dying without Obamacare. And that was his reason for shooting up all these Republicans. Despite all of that, I said it's not Bernie's fault. And Bernie's condemnation where he was like, I condemn all political violence, that was fine for me. It was whippy, but it was fine. But what aggravates me is that Bernie himself, when Congressman Gifford got shot by someone who was just a nut, it wasn't for political reasons. Right? When she got shot, he fundraised off that and said, oh, this is right-wing. It's right-wing violence. Can you even be safe to be a left-winger in these areas? The right needs to condemn their violent rhetoric. Isn't that funny? When the right attacks someone, when some extremists on the right attack someone, it's right-wing politicians' fault. They need to channel their or tamper down their rhetoric. But when someone takes Bernie's exact rhetoric and kills people or tries to kill people, no problem. That's all violence. And even Pelosi came out when someone had the nerve. We actually had one actual press person have the nerve to say, hey, do you think that your rhetoric had something to do with this? He said, how dare you say that? Pelosi got all offended. How dare you? How dare you say something like that? Of course not. This is absurd that you would try to blame us. Yet that's exactly what we see so many Democrats trying to do. So, and Calamity, I saw that, the Dayton shooting, which we'll talk about here more, but that's an example of someone who at least had left-leaning ideology, and that wants to be ignored. Just like Dib correctly says that they want to ignore the violence that occurs in places like Chicago and things like that. Because it's not about actually solving violence, it's about maintaining control and using this as a political weapon to go after your opponents. And I find that truly disgusting. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the right can't do this and won't do this. But as I always say, the left controls all of the cultural institutions of power that shape our public discourse and narrative. They control the mainstream media, the entertainment industry, academia, Silicon Valley. And so now the narrative is becoming, this is right-wing, this is, Trump's responsible, Republicans are responsible, and it's getting worse and worse. It's ironic that people that want to focus so much on rhetoric use such vile, dangerous rhetoric themselves. So, for example, they said Trump was inciting violence when he mentioned the fact that Ilhan Omar said some people did something on 9/11. That, to them, him just bringing up her actual words, was an incitement to violence. But when Cory Booker says Trump should no longer be allowed to have campaign rallies because it's a festering ground for white supremacy, or when you have Joe Scarborough say anyone who supports Trump is a white supremacist, where you have Reza Aslan, who was a CNN correspondent and a mainstream journalist, when you have him saying we need to eradicate all Trump supporters, they don't think that that's dangerous rhetoric. When they're calling ICE, people that are in ICE, Nazis, and the detention centers, concentration camps, they don't think that that rhetoric has any impact. My take on it is we shouldn't be blaming, you should focus on the extremists. As long as we're all condemning violence, which ironically the Squad was unwilling to do when you saw the ICE terrorists, but as long as we're condemning violence, even the Democrats and the people like Bernie, again, Bernie, I think, was a hypocrite because when he saw, like Charlottesville, when he saw Gifford get shot, he exclusively blamed right-wing rhetoric. But when one of his supporters parroted his rhetoric and went out and shot Republicans on a ball field, he didn't exclusively blame left-wing rhetoric. He just said, all violence is bad. And even that, despite him being hypocritical, I'm like, fair enough. He condemned violence. It's not his fault. So, I'm kind of getting off track where I wanted to go, but we're 10 minutes in. So, here's what I wanted to talk about first. Because we are not people of positions of power, what can we do? Because no matter what, it's not a matter, you shouldn't give these extremists such power that you say, oh, I can no longer be worried about illegal immigration because someone took that to the most extreme position possible and murdered people. That's ridiculous. That's giving these killers more credit than they deserve, giving them more influence and power over you than they deserve. But what can we do? So there are things that we could do. The first thing is, I don't care if you're on the left, right, you're a constitutionalist, you're a Green Party member, you're Labour in the UK, whatever. We need to all start condemning political violence, period. It is not acceptable, period. End of story. The only time violence is acceptable is if you yourself are directly in the moment having violence enforced upon you. Then, for self-defense reasons, you can enact violence. But as soon as you say, this policy or this trend that's occurring is eventually going to harm me in the future, or it's, harming me through 6 ways today, and so I'm justified to use some sort of violence, you've opened the door to things, the extreme of that, which will be things like mass shootings. That's why people like me were so offended by this idea that mainstream people were pushing that said, is it okay to punch Nazis? No, it's not. Because it's a short step from them saying, well, if it's okay to punch Nazis are so bad, then it should be okay to shoot Nazis. And oh, by the way, everyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi. And then we start to see kind of some violent insanity that comes as a result of that. That's what's so dangerous, by the way, with people like Cory Booker and Scarborough and Islam that I was talking about that are not... It's not just that they're saying Trump's evil and terrible, which that's dangerous enough. I mean, it's fine to say he's terrible, but to say he's a racist or he's a white supremacist or he's cheering for mass shootings... or he's a Russian agent, all of this without proof, all of this just hyperbolic nonsense to score political points. There's a danger in that, but the real danger is, hey, what's up, Lee? Nice to hear from you. The real danger is when you start labeling supporters of someone. One of the things when I ran for Congress, I talk to people all the time, is I would never, I might disagree with AOC or Nancy Pelosi or Bernie vehemently, but I would never attack their supporters. Their supporters have just as good reasons. I might not think they've reached the right conclusions, or I might not think that they're as informed as me, but they have good reasons for voting who they're voting for. And not only is it strategically stupid to just say, hey, all of my opponents are racist, or they're all stupid, or they're all evil, but it's also morally ridiculous. And again, I don't understand. Trump will say some true statement that is kind of comes off in a belligerent way, and it's not a way I would talk, where he'll say, like, these countries are S-hole countries, or Baltimore's, a hellhole, or something like that. But that's not actually attacking the people of there. We actually see that from prominent Democrats, prominent people on the left, in the media, politicians, in academia, that are saying, if you support Trump, if you wear clothing that supports Trump, then you're basically wearing a Klan hood, and you're basically a white supremacist, or you're a Nazi, or you're responsible for mass shootings. That's very dangerous. Once you start not just attacking the player as in the politician, but attacking their supporters, it's only going to lead to more division and violence. So it's ironic that the same people that are screaming about Trump's divisive rhetoric actually ratcheted up a notch. If you really were concerned with Trump's divisive rhetoric, and listen, he says things, some of his Twitter things that he goes on about, I'm totally against. Like, why is he attacking Rosie O'Donnell or Arnold Schwarzenegger? I don't care about that. That's punching down. That has nothing to do with your role as president now. He says things all the time that I think it is, yes, Augustus, it's okay to punch a Nazi if it's during a boxing match. But only if it's regular boxing. Kickboxers may not punch Nazis even in a match. They can only kick them. But, so that's the irony when it comes to this talk of divisive rhetoric. So that's step one. We should all condemn political violence. I don't care if you're on the right or left. Look, people on the right do this too, and I argue with people on the right all the time that'll say things, and I know a lot of people that listen to me aren't going to like to hear this, but it's the truth. When you have people on the right saying, like, oh, go ahead, let's start this civil war. I'd like to see you we got all the guns. No, that's not acceptable. That's childish and it's stupid, and when you say that, people could take that to the logical extension and say, why wait for it to start? Let's be the first ones, or I feel like it's inevitable that we'll lose in the future, so let's gear up now. and start attacking people now. That's ridiculous and dangerous, and I call that out all the time. We shouldn't be trying to be tough guys that are like, yeah, let's start the violence. That is ridiculous. Now, people will say, oh, but are there people on the left really cheering for violence? Yes, I already talked about The Guardian did the is it okay to punch a Nazi thing. And not only that, there are other people. Like I said, I had a friend of mine and I'm trying to expand listening to left-wing, non-mainstream commentators, such as David Pakman and this guy, Destiny. They're both like good debaters and they're smart people. I respect them. So I watched this debate from Destiny. Now, for those of you that don't know, Destiny's a Twitch streamer. He's a gamer, but he also gets involved in politics. I would say he's left-wing, but one second. Let me shut this door. My dogs are yelping. We'll see if that helps. Anyways, I watched a debate with him the other day, and he has, of course it's on his channel, so thousands of people are saying, oh, you crushed it, you killed this person. That's just the nature of the beast. But he specifically says in that, one, I'm open borders, which is insane, but second, he talks specifically about how he thinks that, although it's strategically a bad idea, it's morally okay for people to want to kill conservatives. He says this. And he's not the only one that says stuff like this. There are other people that do as well. But his justification is, well, let's say you're a dreamer and you think that they're going to revoke the law and you'll end up getting sent to a different country. Well, then it's okay for you to kill people. Now, he also says, but it's only based on your vote is it okay to kill people. Because then the person he's debating is like, okay, well, what if the dreamer wants to move in with you? They're homeless and they want to move in with you. He says, oh, no, morally, that's not up to me. The government is the one that can take care of those people. So it's okay for the government to force your tax dollars and to force our collective will to accept anyone in the world, he believes. And if we say no, those people that want to come in have the right to kill the people that vote against that. Morally, they're justified. Even though if it's not strategically a good idea, morally they're justified. But if a homeless person wants to come in his house, that person, based on his moral decision to say, no, I will not give you money, or no, I will not give you shelter, is not morally justified in killing him. In other words, this is just an excuse for saying you could kill conservatives for their votes, but you can't kill me if I enact my actions in my personal life that are similar to those votes. Now, granted, this is just some Twitch streamer, and you might say, is that a big deal? But there are thousands of people that are agreeing with him on this, and there are other people that don't express it in quite those feelings that are still advocating violence. And there are people on the right that advocate violence as well. So it's up to all of us, regardless of our political background or our philosophy, to say, no, this sort of political violence is not acceptable. Once you start making exceptions, you've opened the door for every single person you disagree with to have those same exceptions. So if you think, hey, it's okay for me to punch a Nazi, then you've given Richard Spencer the justification for saying, I think that these people are trying to take out my life and people like me, and so it's okay for me to punch them. And then you can see the predictable escalation that will occur. So that's the first thing we could do. The second thing we could do is that we could all, there is this idea of see something, say something. Now, you have to be really careful with this. You don't want to abuse this, but if you see someone in your life that you see warning signs that you think might hurt themselves or other, then maybe you should talk to them or talk to the proper authorities and do what you can. And again, this is only a Band-Aid. This isn't going to fix everything. No matter what we do, there will always be this type of mass violence. You take away guns, you take away everyone's personal privacy, you monitor everyone's social media totally, you have the police check up on every citizen every week, and there's still going to be extremists. It's going to happen. It's a sad fact of humanity. We're flawed. People will become extremists. People will lose their minds and they'll do terrible things. But we can do what we can to minimize it. So, I think that's another thing we could do. And this is particularly important if you're in a position it seems often that people are afraid to look at their children or their loved ones in this kind of critical scope, where after a lot of these incidents, we see people say, well, like with the Dayton shooter, for example, we saw, he had kill list and rape list and he had rape fantasies, and people connected to him all knew this, but no one wanted to speak out because, you don't want to be like a narc or seen as something like that, or maybe they're truly just joking. But I do think we're at a place where maybe it behooves people to say something if you see what you think to be ridiculous warning signs. This doesn't mean people joking and things like that. You could, there's a difference. It's a fine line, I get that. But, you don't just report someone because you saw someone open carry or you saw someone make an off-color joke once. But if you see a continued pattern that looks disturbing, maybe you should do something. Another thing that I think we could do is all push for a serious look at mental health. I work in the mental health field, and I can tell you that a lot of people that have kind of violent actions and stuff, even if they do have a serious mental condition, with the correct environment, a lot of that violence can be tampered down. I'm not going to get into a lot of what I do, but I've seen that firsthand. And so I think it's something as a country, Republicans and Democrats, we could all look at, or if you're neither of those parties or centrist or Green Party, whatever, that's something that I think that we could all come together and agree on and be able to do things like that. And other things we could do is stop saying the shooter's name, stop publicizing them as much, stop linking to, I'm a hypocrite because I'm talking about them now, and I read the manifestos and things like that. But you have to understand that a lot of this is about, in my opinion, these like narcissists that want personal attention and things like that. And I'll get to the specifics of the El Paso shooter and his connections to the Christchurch shooter, but it seems to me, particularly with the Christchurch shooter, that he's just like a character like the Joker from The Dark Knight, where I'm sure he's a racist. I'm sure he hated Muslims. I don't think that you can fake that. But I think even more than that he just wants to see the world burn. He all but says that. He all but admits in his manifesto, hey, I'm throwing out red meat for the left and for the right because I know you're all so stupid you'll take the bait and start blaming each other. And he was right. That's the irony. That's okay, Dib. It's all right to disagree. So and you feel free to type out what you disagree with, and we can talk about it if you want. But so when you start to take the bait and you start to say, I'm blaming the other side for this, that's exactly what the Christchurch shooter wanted. The El Paso shooter says he was heavily influenced by the Christchurch shooter, if we are to believe their manifestos. So those are some of the things we could do. Now when it comes to the see something, say something, it's something that I have a real, we're now having this discussion of red line laws, or I forget whatever term they're using. But basically it just says that if you've seen these terms, what they're talking about is laws that say if a loved one or someone close to you contacts law enforcement, they have the right to take away your weapons until you basically have some sort of hearing that proves that you're mentally fit to have these weapons. I mean, one of the things I think that you'll see, that seems like it could make sense, but I worry about something like that, just like I worry about the see something, say something, in that we know there are people that are clearly willing to lie or to make up stories in order to achieve their political ends, and being anti-gun is a very passionate thing, so I see no reason that people wouldn't abuse this, and anytime they knew anyone owned a gun, just say, I'm worried that they'll go out and kill people, and then we lose our Second Amendment rights as a result of this. Yeah, red flag laws, that's the name of it. So I don't know how they're workable. I mean, to me, this is no different than, if you could do that with the Second Amendment, why can't you do it with the First Amendment, right? Well, I don't think this person should be allowed to have a social media account or speak publicly until he's able to prove that he's not guilty of being a lunatic that will inspire violence. And this seems to go with the Democratic theme that you saw with Justice Kavanaugh, where the idea is guilty until proven innocent. We have to believe Kavanaugh's accusers. We just have to believe him. And that, for me, was one of the, quote, red lines with the Democratic Party, that and the Covington situation, where these ideas of where you're basically saying people are guilty until proven innocent, that has more of a threat to our society than even things like these mass shootings do. Not that I'm belittling if you were a victim of a mass shooting or one of your family members are, clearly that's the end-all be-all, don't get me wrong. But as far as totally changing the landscape of our country, getting rid of due process would actually have a greater effect on the entire country more than the mass shootings were. So that's kind of what we could do personally, what my take on that is. So now let's get to kind of the idea of mass shootings in general. There's this idea that these mass shootings are increasing, and this is something that I talk about often, and you'll hear me ranting about later in this video. I think I'm sick and tired of how people try to control definitions of terms in order to score political points, and in order to be ambiguous and kind of get away with saying things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. For example, one of the things I'll talk about later is, now one of the things I'm hearing is, because we saw that the El Paso, if you saw my last video, the El Paso shooter included a bunch of stuff about environmentalism and climate change going to kill us all. And my question was, look, if the media and the Dems are going to say, hey, this guy's rhetoric sounded like Trump's at some point, why wouldn't they also say, but here it sounded like AOC's and Nancy Pelosi's and Elizabeth Warren's? They conveniently leave out that. Now, I don't believe that either of their rhetoric, Pelosi's and the Democrats, or Trump's, those people shouldn't be blamed for the actions of this psychopath. But if you're going to say, oh, this rhetoric looks like Trump's, therefore Trump's to blame and his supporters, you should be honest enough to at least be like, oh, and this part of the rhetoric looks like the Democrats. But what I'm being told is, no, see, environmentalism, that's actually a right-wing cause. That's one of the defenses that I'm hearing from this when I'm arguing with people online is, oh, actually, eco-fascism, that's the right wing. It's like, well, yeah, I guess there could be an eco-fascist that you could say also has right-wing positions. But the idea of claiming that the environment, being tumultuous and being hyperbolic about the environment, or even not hyperbolic, that's unfair. That's me inserting my own opinion into it. Being your primary concern seems to be a position on the left. And so for you to say, well, it's a position on the left until someone does something bad about it, then it's a position on the right, that changing of the terms is ridiculous. And it's clearly done just for political motivation. Not to mention, if we're just focusing on the rhetoric, then it doesn't matter. So I guess what you're saying is then the Democratic Party, or if you talk about climate change, then you're a right-winger? Is that what you're saying? No. They'll say it's just when you get violent about the climate, then you're a right-winger. It's so stupid. It defies belief. But that's what we end up seeing. So one of the terms you see done with kind of trying to control the definition of is mass shooting. What is a mass shooting? And I'm confused, right? Because I could look at 5 different people and they have 5 different definitions of what a mass shooting is. Is it more than 4 people at a time? I think that's the FBI definition, though I could be wrong. I don't know. Some people say, oh, no, when we're talking about these mass shootings, we're just talking about ones that are politically motivated. We're not talking about gang shootings. Gang shootings aren't considered mass shootings. Or, if it's, there's all kinds of ideas that would it be a mass murder if there's a prison riot or, and things like that. One person kills 4 people. I don't know. But when we talk about, people want to skew these statistics, and it's something that I always say, I don't have a problem with people using statistics. In fact, I didn't make a video about it, but who was it? Don Lemon said, actually, if we look at the stats, it's white men that we need to be worried about. And people were going off about how racist that is. It is racist in a sense, in that, it's specifically saying we should be suspicious of people based only on their skin color. But if he's just referencing the statistics, and he's right about the statistics aren't racist. How you use them can be racist. So if the FBI stats really do say that white men commit the bulk of mass shootings, that's not offensive to me to bring up. The question is that what it says? And why is that category of mass shooting all that seems to matter? To me, it would seem like as follows. I don't really care what your weapon is. I don't really care what the circumstances are. I'm just concerned about murders. People, regardless of their skin color, gender, religious belief, etc., age, killing other people. What are the themes we see around that? Because that's theoretically why you're discussing the statistics. Because you're trying to look for patterns and you're trying to look for ways to solve these murders from occurring in the future. Why would you focus only on mass murders or mass shootings? It doesn't make sense to me. And you'll get to what I'm talking about in a minute. So for some reason, forget all these murders. Even though, if the mass shootings were the bulk of the killings, if that's where the bulk of people were getting killed, great, I get it. And by no means am I saying we shouldn't try to isolate why mass shootings occur and try to solve it. But in the grand scheme of things, aren't we just concerned with people being murdered, period, no matter who they are, if you're in this country, right? And that's where I'm getting, Dib. So, one of the things I find funny is, I think it's hilarious. And again, I say this all the time. I'm biased. I'm right-wing. I'm conservative. I'm Republican, even though I complain about Republicans a lot, right? But one of the things I often talk about is, I actually care about the inner city. It's one of the things when I ran for Congress as a Republican, I think that kind of the Republicans have dropped the ball because I think that kind of a constitutional message, a message of individuality and treating people based as individuals as opposed to a group or a skin color like the Democrats want to do with identity politics, I think that's a message that people of all colors, of all demographics would be in support of. I could be wrong, but that's what I feel the Republican Party should be trying to do, and that's what I'm trying to do. But one of the things you talk about when you're talking about, you have to be honest about the inner city violence. That's why, I didn't have a problem with what Trump said. It was crude about Baltimore, but, he's right. I would rather, if I lived I live in an S-hole area of the world, the small town I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. I wouldn't be that offended if a politician said that, as long as they're willing to say, hey, there's a lot of problems here. This area is really screwed up. There's drug problems. There's poverty problems. All crime problems. So it's a mess. Now we need to try to solve it. I would rather have that than someone to say, oh no, the place is perfect. How dare you? And again, as I said at the first part of my video here, isn't it ironic we consider it divisive to insult a place, but the same people that consider that divisive and terrible and racist have no problem insulting actual supporters and saying they're all racist and wearing Klan hoods and things of that nature. To me, insulting the people is way more divisive and way worse than insulting a place. In fact, we saw that in Baltimore where a lot of people interviewed residents of Baltimore and they were like, yeah, Trump's right. It is rat infested. It's terrible. Someone needs to help us out. There's all sorts of corruption that occurs here. But anyways, it's getting off topic. One of the things you talk about when you talk, you'll discuss like FBI statistics. I don't really care that the FBI statistics show that young black men, which is about 6% of the population, commit about 50% of murders. The color isn't what's important to me. I think what's more important is the demographic area. So these like terrible inner city places. But one of the reasons when I first came to these statistics was when you're discussing things like Black Lives Matter. Yeah, I agree. As someone from near Pittsburgh, I agree with you about Philadelphia. But so like there's this idea, the Black Lives Matter, the central thesis was cops, particularly white cops, are shooting unarmed black men because of racism. And most of the stats don't back this up. The biggest study that was done from Harvard from a black professor who expected to prove that was shocked to see actually that's not the case, that it's within the margin of error, but actually his study showed that unarmed white people were slightly more likely to be shot than unarmed black people. But my contention was always, well, why do we just jump on race? And we do this all the time. Anytime you look and there's a demographic that's not in the majority, so a minority demographic, and there's something that they're falling behind on, whether it be education, single parenthood, economic, things like that, everyone wants to just scream racism. But that's just, correlation's not causation. Just because one group of people is doing worse doesn't mean it's because of racism. There could be all sorts of factors. Racism could be a factor. It's worth talking about, but we should be honest and look at the stats and look at all the factors. And to me, it seems like a far more reasonable conclusion that the bulk of the reason that there were a lot of shootings with blacks is because a lot of blacks live in these inner cities where violence is so high. It's not because of their skin color, it's because of the environment they're living in. And so if you, as a white person, if I get pulled over by the cops in a drug-infested area of Detroit or Chicago where gang violence is through the roof, that cop's going to be on edge as he pulls me over. Him being on edge, knowing his life's sometimes in danger in this area, makes him far more likely to justifiably or unjustifiably use violence because he's on edge. Compared to where I live in rural Pennsylvania, the police officers aren't as much on edge because day after day, it's very rare that any violence is directed towards police officers or things like homicides and other such things occur. So it has nothing to do with the skin color, it's the area of the world. It just so happens that a lot of black people live there. Now, you could say, why are black people living there? Sure, we could have a nuanced discussion. But the reason I bring this up is when I cite these statistics, I'm told over and over, that's racism. That's racism for you to cite those FBI statistics. How dare you say black people commit more murders? Well, I'm not being a racist. I'm not citing those statistics to say, aha, this proves black people are inferior and I don't want some black guy living in my town. I'm not saying that at all. I'm citing these statistics because I'm saying, yeah, there is a problem. I'd like to solve it. And, and by the way, when we're talking about like the entire theme that I'm talking about here is why are we just focused on mass shootings instead of murders in general? It's the same with Black Lives Matter. Why are they just focused on police shootings when actually the number one cause of death from young black men is other young black men? That has nothing to do with the police being involved. It's the same with the mass shootings. Most people that are murdered in this country are murdered with that type of violence. Don't those people matter? Don't the victims in the inner city matter? So I'm often told, Joe, what's happening, man? Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Joe. So that's why a lot of this violence occurs. But you can see how they strategically control the definition of this, because then they'll say, oh, look how violent the United States is. Well, wait a minute, it's these certain areas. And they don't want you to talk about those areas individualistically. They don't want you to look at specific solutions or causes in those areas, but they want to use that to generalize on everything else. So the point I'm making is they'll say, the FBI statistic, that's racist. Law enforcement's racist. Of course they're going to have racism. Now, two quick things about this. The first is, well, then what I always say to this is, because it's not worth trying to prove how, like, absurd that argument is. So what I always say in this instance is, okay, Can you at least be honest that we know that this kind of trope of like the white racist, the Richard Spencers of the world saying black people are killing white people, you know, in droves, that's actually not true. Actually, most races murder within their own race. So the majority of murders that occur that white people are victims are actually done by white people, and the majority of murders that black people are victims of are done by black people, and most people will agree with that, and the evidence backs that up. So then if you look at the National Crime Victimization Survey, we see that right about the same number as the FBI says of young black men committing homicide, they're also the victims of. About 50% of the victims of homicide in this country are young black men. So I'm considered a racist when I look at it for the perpetrator, but the only reason I'm looking at it in the perpetrator is because I'm concerned about the victims. Why are so many people ignoring the droves of young black men that are being killed? They don't focus on that at all. They never want to talk about it. I don't care what their demographic is or what their political leanings are. It doesn't matter. They're Americans. We deserve to look at this situation and see what we can do to make it better. The fact that we ignore this violence day after day after day, but then as soon as a mass shooting occurs and all of these cultural institutions of the power say, aha, we could use this in our advantage to attack Trump and his supporters, now all of a sudden it matters. I find it disingenuous and disgusting. That's how I feel about it. And I also find it ironic that now they'll use the FBI statistics. Right? The same people that'll call you a racist if you want to say, well, wait, FBI statistics actually show that, you know, young black men are committing about 50% of these murders. The same people that'll call you a racist for that want to say, see, the FBI statistics say it's actually white men that are a problem with mass shootings. Okay, so now it's cool to use mass shootings? By the way, they do the same with immigrants. They'll say FBI stats show that illegal immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than actual people in this country. So they'll use those statistics when it racially benefits them. I'll use the statistics regardless of who the race is. So I'm not being hypocritical. And they're actually wrong about the illegal immigrant question because, for example, it's a felony to steal someone's identity. And we know that many, many illegal immigrants do that, but they leave out those numbers when they're talking about FBI crime statistics. And we actually have no idea how many illegals are here. So for you to make a proportion, in order to make a proportion, like for example, in order to say 10% of the apples were rotten, you need to know how many apples were rotten and how many apples in total there were. So in order for people to say the percentage of illegal immigrants that commit crime are lower than the percentage of people born in this country that commit crimes, well, you have no clue how many illegal immigrants are here, so you're lying when you say that, which isn't hard to find out. So yeah, I mean, and Joe, that's something that's worth talking about too, is, well, a lot of people are like, yeah, but I'm not involved. It's almost like that scene in Training Day, right? Where Ethan Hawke's character's like, so what do you do? Just leave the animals kill each other? And Denzel's like, God willing. You know, I don't feel that way, and I'm not saying everyone that doesn't talk about that does feel that way, but I'm just saying, I feel that we should, to me, a murdered American's a murdered American, and we need to investigate what the causes of that sort of stuff is. But you're right, like with mass shootings, there is a difference because that's where, like, you can see children getting shot or people that have nothing to do. Now, granted, a lot of people that are probably involved in the inner city probably, I don't know the numbers, I'm just talking out my butt here, but you know, I would guess a lot of people that are killed, you know, there's probably kids that are killed, you know, people that weren't involved in drug crime or something like that were just trying to do the right thing. So certainly innocent people can be caught up in that. And even people that are guilty and involved in drugs almost exclusively don't deserve to be shot. Maybe if you're specifically shooting at someone and you get shot and killed, or you've murdered someone and you get murdered back, that's the exception. Anyways, so yeah, it is worth talking about the causes of these mass shootings, right, as an individual phenomenon. But let's not pretend that these people are doing so selectively and for political reasons. If your take on this, and this is something we all do, and I've been guilty, if your take when you hear about a mass shooting, your first feeling is, oh, I hope it was someone on the other side, you really need to check yourself. And again, I'm not saying I'm better than people. I've done this. Oh, I hope it's not a Trump supporter. I mean, the tragedy is the tragedy. The people are dead regardless of who the supporter was. So what do we do, right? How do we look at this? So the first question is, are the mass shootings actually increasing? Well, it actually depends on how you define things. Some things I see say yes, it has been increasing, but overall violent crime is very much decreasing since the 70s. I've seen other things that say, well, actually, like pre-70s mass shootings were way higher than they are now, which seems to go against this it's video games fault narrative that you see people on the right and the left pushing. But what are the reasons for it? Is it increasing? I don't know how much it's increasing versus how much the awareness of them are increasing. For example, we see social media talking about it, people like me talking about it, the mass media talking about it, entertainment industry talking about it, etc. And so you can't get away from it, whereas before it might be something that was in the news for a day and then you forgot about it. Now it may seem more prevalent because there's so much media covering it 24/7 that it's just something that stands out more. I don't know. I've also seen studies, which so far to me I haven't seen a rebuttal to, and it does seem to make sense, which is the chances of mass shootings occurring in clusters is actually increased for this very reason. It's like once it's out there in the ether and once one psychopath sees, oh, look at all the attention this other one's getting, it kind of springs in their head, maybe now's the time to do this. So it seems you often see these type of things occur in clusters, and the chances of them happening are more likely when another event had happened recently, which could explain why part of the reason we saw, 3 happen in such a short period of time. More than that if you consider the Chicago violence. Yeah, then you have questions. So that's the first question. We need an honest look at statistics in a nonpartisan way, which is near impossible at this point because partisanship's even infected the sciences and things like that. But we need to look critically at how much is it increasing, if at all is it increasing. My feeling is it's probably, at least in the last 10 years, increased somewhat. At least the type of mass shootings we're talking about. So what could the reasons be? And I think the number one reason is, you're right, is mental illness. And not only that, just sort of antisocial behavior in general. It's not because of video games. To me, that's not it. That contributes slightly to it. But it's more of this idea of people don't have real world connections. Like before we had social media and things like that, you actually had people that were talking to you. You had real consequences. You got in a scuffle, you got in an argument. Like arguing with someone's hard. Like getting in a passionate disagreement with someone, it takes somewhat of a toll on you. It really does. But doing it online is nothing. Social media interactions is nothing. So just look at Twitter. Twitter's dominated. I think that something like 20% of U.S. adults have Twitter, but only 3% of the people on Twitter are responsible for over 90% of the tweets. That basically means 3% of people are controlling a huge part of the mass media narrative. A huge part of it. Right? And they're extreme. That's what rises on Twitter. The most extreme takes. And so when you see this and you don't experience real world consequences, and you don't have real friends, and you kind of feel like alone, maybe that's what leads to this. I know a lot of these mass shooters are on, what do they call them, SSRDs, or antipsychotropic medications that actually have a lot of side effects. But certainly we need to look at the mental illness aspect, and that's why I was saying I think we need to, all sides could agree that that's something we could come together on. Video games save lives. I mean, I could see the argument that theoretically, releasing your aggression playing video games means you don't go out and do it in real life. But I haven't seen the studies that show that there's a correlation one way or the other. To me, everything I've seen shows that there's no evidence that SSRI, there's no evidence that video games cause an increase in shootings. But I have to admit, I haven't seen evidence that says it decreases shootings either. So, but it was stupid. I saw one politician, a Republican, said, Japan doesn't have video games, that's why they don't have mass shootings. Absolutely insane. Of course they do. Like, Japan's kind of the homeland for modern video games. Where do you think Nintendo and all these places came from? Real quick, let me check this out real quick. Anyways. So there's that reason for it. There is, you could say access to guns is some sort of reason. The question is, what do we do about that? It is a Second Amendment right. I don't buy into these laws unless you're going to have an amendment to start with. It is a right that was given to us, just like our right to free speech. We've already seen the Fourth Amendment totally decimated. You no longer have a right to privacy. That's what the Patriot Act and things like that did. And don't get me wrong, I'm concerned with safety. But once we gave up, we were all told because of threat of terrorism, which is very similar to this idea of mass shootings. They're low frequency but high impact events. Little chance of them affecting you personally, but when they do happen, they really get into the psyche of us and our country. And so many people said, yeah, I'm for the Patriot Act, or, whatever, because I need to be kept safe. And once you give those rights, this is what my take on the Patriot Act, right? So let's say the Patriot Act gets passed and we don't have a terror attack for 10 years. What do you think the people that are now took away your Fourth Amendment rights are saying? See? The Patriot Act worked. Your right to privacy Yeah, right. I understand rights aren't given to us. Your right to privacy... your right to privacy needs to be infringed upon because it kept us all safe. But then say in that same 10-year period, instead of being kept safe, we actually had a bunch of attacks. Are they going to say, oh, well, we were wrong, the Patriot Act didn't help, so we're gonna stop invading your privacy? No, they'll say we need to invade it even more. Once you give the government power, it's very difficult to take that away. And I understand the idea that rights are not given, but they certainly could be taken away. You're born with the rights, they're inalienable, but do you have the right to privacy? Ask Carter Page that, right? Ask George Papadopoulos what their right to privacy is. Sure, it was unalienable, but the government took it away. And so if we start to allow the government to take away the Second Amendment rights, what's to say they won't take away the First Amendment rights? And you already see a push for that, for people saying, oh, we get rid of hate speech. You know, we see it occurring in the public sphere, and in some ways it's more dangerous, in like kind of the private sphere, because you see corporations like Google that have such a control over the public narrative that are deplatforming people. That's almost as impactful as what the government could do. In some ways worse. So we're only a stone's throw away from giving away our First Amendment rights as well, for allowing the government to infringe on them. So I'm very skeptical. And that's why these red flag laws, it seems to make sense in a world where everyone's reasonable. You would say, yes, this person, it looks really bad over here. But we could see, just look at Twitter, look at social media. But, for goodness sakes, we have Julian Castro, a Democratic presidential candidate, specifically listing Trump supporters in an effort to get them harassed. Do you really think people like him and people that have the same ideology as him are beyond accusing you of heinous things so that your Second Amendment rights are taken away? Of course not. So we have to be very careful. People say, if you're on the do not fly list, then you should not be able to buy a gun. But oftentimes people are put in that list and they have no clue. They have no way to defend themselves, and it's totally egregious and erroneous that they're on the list. So to take someone's fundamental right that was in the Bill of Rights, the second right, away, based on some area that you have no due process on, seems absurd. Yes, I understand people want to act emotionally, and no one wants to see these mass shootings. And there could be potential laws we can have that affect guns. But we have to be really careful about this stuff. That's to me, one of the things that's frightening about this. And when you ask people, let's look at this logically. Like, for example, I saw someone on Twitter say, okay, gun advocates, let's just do this. Let's just temporarily, let's just say for 2 years, say, hey, we're going to have a ban on certain types of guns, what they call assault weapons. We'll do it for 2 years. And then, if it decreased these shootings, we'll keep the law, and if it didn't, we'll get rid of it. Yeah, we did that. We had an assault weapons ban. And guess what? It had no effect. It didn't decrease shootings. So, well, let's try it again. And that's always the case. And the other thing is, and this is the biased nature in me, but I honestly believe that one of the things I've said, it's not just the Democrats, but the Democrats happen to be the party of big government. But anyone cheering for big government, oftentimes I find, not everyone, and I try to imply any specific person I'm talking to with the best of intentions, but oftentimes what you see is people are being disingenuous. And you can tell by the way people argue about gun control, because they don't know what they're talking about, they haven't done their research. I'm not going to claim to be a gun expert, I'm a layman myself. But I know people in my family and people connected to me that are far bigger experts than me, and I do have some layman's knowledge more than often many of these anti-Second Amendment people have. But they'll say, get rid of assault weapons. Why? Because, one squeeze, one pull. Those are the type of guns we need to get away from. Okay, so handguns? No. Okay, because the bulk of killings are done with handguns. No, not them, just the AR. Okay, what is it specifically about the AR? Because oftentimes, if you show them an AR, but it has a wood stock and doesn't have the banana clip, they'll say, yeah, that's a good gun, that's a hunting rifle. But it shoots the same bullets, and it's a semi-automatic all the same. So are you talking about a clip size? Because, we see handguns could have, 17 or more clips, and that's not even, out of the ordinary. Not clip 17 bullets in a clip. And other things like that. And oftentimes what you see is the rationale they're given, you can tell that they're then going to go the next step. They're never going to be satiated. And you can tell because you accuse them of this and they say, no. But then when some tragedy happens, they say, we should just get rid of all guns. And so that's something that I find very unscrupulous. And by the way, it was the same type of argument that we made with immigration. People like me were saying, look, they want open borders. They want open borders. No. Now we see they're still saying we're not open borders. We just want to make it so it's not a crime to cross the border, and make it so the U.S. doesn't send anyone back, and make it so we don't detain anyone, and make it so we give them all free health care and education. Yeah, that's open borders, even if you don't want to... yeah, thanks, Rob. At least it's not a bullet when it's in a magazine. It's a round, says Rob D. And then calls me a layman, which I told you I was a layman. I was being honest about it. But, so you can see, like, if they would just be legitimate and argue in good faith, then it would be like, oh, okay. But I don't think that's the case with a lot of them. And I know that makes me a hypocrite because I say you should always assume that you're arguing in good faith, but it seems to me that they always want to go a step further. And the other thing I have to say about the laws, specifically about guns, are why is it that we don't enforce the laws on the books? In fact, some of the very same people that are advocating for new laws are also advocating giving lighter sentences for people that egregiously break the current gun laws on the books. How does that make sense? For example, when Obama did his town hall on guns in 2015, I should have pulled up the actual stats. I have them somewhere. Maybe I'll talk about this in the future as well. But something like 100,000 cases were reported to the federal government of people attempting to illegally purchase guns. These would be people that no longer had the right to purchase guns because they'd committed some sort of crime, a felony or something like that, and so legally they weren't allowed to purchase guns. And so if you are a felon and you try to purchase a gun, you've committed another crime. You've tried to illegally obtain a gun. 100,000 or so times this happened in 2015 or under Obama. I can't remember exactly what it was. Do you know how many times the federal government decided to prosecute those people? Less than 1%. So why are we putting new laws on the books when the criminals that are actually attempting to get guns, that's just one area we can see, are being treated with kid gloves? You can see that the idea isn't, if that's your stance, if that's the federal government's stance, then it seems obvious to me their position isn't we want to preserve people's rights while just trying to get the guns out of the violent people's hands. They're saying we want to take away people's rights. That's first and foremost. If you're not enforcing the laws on the book, particularly in the strictest possible ways for the most egregious offenders, then any advocacy for wanting new laws is just you saying, I just want to punish law-abiding people by taking their rights away even more. Now, I don't know that I agree with you, Dib, that there should be zero gun laws. Like, should people be able to have, flamethrowers, things like that? I don't know about that. I think that there probably needs to be some sort of check on things like that. Even something like a bump stock, I can see, well, what is the utility of this? This isn't a gun, it's a gun accessory. So I don't know. But the problem with banning bump stocks is it's really easy to make your own. And by the way, that's going to be a problem with gun confiscation if they decide to go that way. The more we get technology, things like 3D printing will make getting guns, particularly for those who most want them, easy. I say no to flamethrowers. I disagree with that. But again, so I don't know. But the idea of focusing on the laws, I don't mind having the conversation. I'm willing to listen to good faith people talk about it. But I'm always hesitant to give the government the power to take away our rights. It always seems to bite us. We never get those rights back. Our right to privacy, gone. Because of the Patriot Act. It'll never, the NSA, the FISA courts, there's no reining that in. And it seeps into the private sector where you have no privacy now. Just by the fact that you're watching this on YouTube, your privacy is diminished. So. But now to talk about specifics. So let's talk specifically about the El Paso shooter and the media's reaction and the Democrats' reaction. I find one of the things I say with these incidents, anytime there's any type of terrible instance that's done for political violence, that I say all the time is the violence that concerns me the most is the violence that is accepted by people with power in the mainstream. That's what you really have to be worried for, because even if that's not the most predominant violence today, they are setting the path for that form of violence to be the most predominant in the future. So while white supremacy, Tucker's getting heat because in his show last night he said white supremacy is a myth. He doesn't mean that literally, like there are no white supremacists. He's saying that it's blown so far out of proportion that the idea that it's the boogeyman under the stairs is so ridiculous that it's a myth that people are focusing on that as like the biggest problem in this country or a major problem. Now look, I'm all for condemning white supremacy. I hate identitarian politics, period. That includes the white supremacists. They're wrong, they're evil, and those that would enact violence are disgusting and should be jailed. Period. I have no love for the white supremacists at all. But it is something that's being overblown and used to push all sorts of other argumentation. And the greatest example of that is this El Paso shooter and what we see. I mean, we literally have it's not the randos online that I'm concerned with, right? Like, I know that you go to 4chan and you can find people saying anything. Got it. But when you have people in power saying the kind of crazy things that we're seeing, it becomes insane. It is now just the mainstream narrative of the Democratic Party that Trump is a white supremacist, that he is responsible for this mass shooting. Not only that, but there is a subset of that, prominent people again in the Democratic Party, that are saying anyone who wears a MAGA hat is wearing a Klan hood, the equivalent of it. All Trump supporters are racist and are responsible for this mass shooting. We have people like Cory Booker saying Trump supporters should not be allowed to gather for a campaign rally because it's a festering hotbed of white supremacy. This is being mainstreamed. Now imagine, I want to take you in a time machine, right? Imagine you go back in time to a time when a Bernie Sanders supporter shot up a Republican ball field, right? Thank God that no one was really killed, or no one was killed and more people weren't hurt because of the awesome law enforcement officers that were there. But let's go back to that time, and that was a serious thing. You're talking about serious political violence. Not just attacking people for a political motivation at somewhere like a Walmart, which is evil, don't get me wrong, but actually taking out politicians you disagree with, right? Serious deal. A country can't survive if that starts to become the norm. It can't. So imagine if when that happened, Donald Trump or Republicans came out and said, hey, you know what? We don't think the Democrats should be allowed to gather anymore for campaign rallies, particularly for Bernie. This guy's a Bernie supporter. And, you know, the Democrats' rhetoric of if the Republicans get their health care wishes, millions of people will die, or Trump's a Russian agent, or Trump's a racist and his supporters are racist, or Trump's a Nazi. That's all incredibly violent rhetoric where violence is going to come out. So we need to condemn all those people, and they're all terrible, evil people, and we can't leave them gathered. What do you think the reaction in the media would have been? It would have been insane. People would have said, Trump, this is it. Trump's the dictator we all thought he was. This is the greatest. Can you believe a serious leader in a political party would say something like this? This is horrible. What an evil man. Riot in the street. We have to usurp this authoritarian. But when the left does it, it's just, meh. Imagine if you go back in time and you see people like AOC and Ilhan Omar repeatedly saying ICE detention facilities are concentration camps. They're concentration camps. All right, imagine that they say that over and over again. And then an Antifa terrorist, by the way, they're also saying their cohorts on the left say, Antifa's not that bad, Antifa could be good. And then an Antifa terrorist tries to blow up one of the facilities and kill a bunch of ICE agents, and presumably the people that were being detained. I still don't understand that. So imagine then that those people refuse to condemn that violence. Again, I don't think AOC should be at fault for that. If she came out and said, look, whoa, I think these are concentration camps. She's wrong, and it needs to understand there's a danger in even saying that. But by no means am I advocating any sort of violence. And this guy was despicable that attacked that facility. But she didn't say that, did she? Neither did Omar. And the media didn't press it. Meanwhile, have you heard any Republicans that were asked saying, I'm not going to condemn the El Paso shooter? Have you heard any? No. They all came out without needing to be asked. Yes, this is despicable. White supremacy is a scourge. Now again, I'm not saying that we should blame the rhetoric, but if you're specifically asked, look, this guy basically used the same words as you, do you want to take this moment to condemn? How hard is it to just say, yeah, of course I condemn this. Of course. But to even, to be asked point blank and refuse, and then have the media act like, oh yeah, and it's the other side that has divisive rhetoric. It's insanity. 60 million something people voted for Trump. They're all racist. They're all responsible for a mass shooting. According to prominent people in the media and the Democratic Party. What do you think that language is going to lead to? These are the same people that say, oh, rhetoric matters, rhetoric matters. I called it out with the Antifa thing. I called it out with the climate change thing. On my Antifa video with this ICE terrorist, you go back and watch it, and I said, here's a prediction I can make. As long as people refuse in the mainstream to condemn this sort of action, it will occur in greater number. You'll see it occur again. Well, what about the Dayton shooter? Turns out he called this guy a martyr. Anyone on the left saying, no, they're distancing themselves. The media doesn't want to cover the story. Just like the gang violence in Chicago. Don't want to cover it. Because it doesn't fit their narrative. Because they're not actually concerned about people dying. They're not actually concerned about stopping violence. They're concerned about ratings, consolidating wealth and power, and scoring political points. What does condemning do for anyone? It signifies at least that you're not telling people to go out and kill people in your name. Will it work? I don't know, but at least you're distancing yourself and making it clear that you're not supporting violence. I know what not condemning does. I know what supporting does. Go punch a Nazi. Yeah. So yeah, you could say, oh, like raising, Doug Stanhope, one of my favorite comedians, is like, what does raising awareness do? Raising awareness is someone who sees a wreck and stands on the curb and goes, look! That's raising awareness. You're not actually helping to anything. But when we're involved in divisive politics, you should at least be able to say, look, I stand by my comments, but the people that are using that to enact violence are wrong. They shouldn't be doing that. Because a lot of people look up to AOC and might say, oh, so she says they're concentration camps, or any of these Democrats. They say they're concentration camps, and then some guy went and tried to kill the people running those concentration camps, and she was asked point blank, hey, you want to distance yourself from this? And she says, no, I'm not going to distance myself. I'm just going to ignore it. I won't talk about it. So that must be the signal to me. Yeah, this is what she wants. Well, I don't know that you could say all people on the right don't care about rhetoric. I don't think that's true. I mean, certainly there are some that do. But yeah, in general, you see, because the left is in power now with all these cultural institutions, they control the narrative, and their narrative is rhetoric only matters when it's on the right and it causes something bad to happen. If it's left-wing rhetoric and a left-wing person like shoots up the ball field, they don't care. Oh, that's still Trump's fault. Dayton shooter's still Trump's fault. If a shooter says in his manifesto, in his words, he hates Trump, like the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter, it's still Trump's fault. So, I mean, it's what they're doing is ridiculous. And I'm just telling you, like I said, I was right about the Antifa thing. I said this about climate change. I said, look, if people take the message seriously that all these Democrats and all these people are saying about climate change, we only have 12 years, 18 months now, the one group's saying, 18 months. What do you do? If you really believe in all your heart, in 18 months or in 12 years, we're dead. The entire world's dead. What are you willing to do? Just post on Facebook? Just post on Twitter? Or are you going to go out in the real world and do something to try to affect change? And I was like, you got to be careful. One of my questions about climate change, which I haven't seen answered, is, well, if we only have 12 years and U.S. is only responsible for 15% of pollution, when are we bombing China? When are we bombing India to stop their pollution? Well, they don't want to talk about that. But that just goes to show this hyperbolic language can have consequences. Again, I'm not blaming the people for the rhetoric. But if we're looking on it in a fair scale, if you're saying, okay, let's blame rhetoric, which rhetoric is more likely to incite violence? Trump saying, sick and tired of illegal immigration, they're damaging the country, it's really bad, people like Kate Steinle would be alive if we didn't have sanctuary cities? Or people saying Trump and all of his supporters are racist Nazis that encourage mass shooters. Which side do you think an independent person's more likely to say, geez, that seems like it's more likely to lead to someone enacting violence? Then the side of Trump, anytime someone commits violence, they'll say, no, the white supremacy is evil, it's terrible, we condemn all this violence. When the violence occurs on the left, it's, well, we're not going to condemn left-wing violence, we still think it's Trump's fault, we think all violence is bad, but we're not going to specifically condemn our rhetoric. We're not going to say we could have led to this at all. It's still Trump's fault. Now, what side do you think is more likely to lead to violence? Now, let's talk about white supremacy. How big of a threat is it? I don't know. I see the FBI numbers. Why are they cherry-picked? Why are we only talking about, again, I kind of already talked about this, but the mass shootings, if we're taking a specific subset, then I guess maybe white supremacy is most responsible for it. I mean, just like if you take crimes, it is just true that there are subsets of people that are more likely to commit those crimes. Like we know white-collar crime is committed more by white people than black people. I think it has to do with kind of the area they're in, the jobs they're in. Just the same way that black people commit more homicide. I think a lot of that has to do with the situation in the area you're in. Why do more black people kill black people and white people kill white people? Well, it probably has to do with, who do you live by? Who's your community? You're probably not going to... Most murders aren't someone, going into some other community and murdering people. You're probably murdering people you know. You probably know most people that kind of are within your group. So, I think that has a lot to do with it. But we constantly hear this drumbeat. And again, what I'm talking about is, I'm not saying don't condemn white supremacy. Sure, go after it. I have no love for it at all. At all. You don't say punch a Nazi. I've seen interviews with Jared Taylor and Richard Spencer. You know what they say the number one driver to their organizations was? Black Lives Matter. The media. Because when you see these groups, when you see people saying the Betsy Ross flag is racist, there are people that feel disenfranchised that are looking for answers. And they end up going to those groups. And let me tell you a story, which I told on a live stream I did a while ago when I was debating a friend of mine. In the UK, you had these Muslim grooming gangs where thousands upon thousands of girls were raped over a 3-decade period. And the police knew about it. The politicians knew about it. But they didn't do anything because they were afraid to be called racist by calling out these Muslim grooming gangs. Okay? Tommy Robinson's this figure who's now jailed, who was kind of like a soccer hooligan, and he's certainly done some unsavory things. And there are things that I would condemn him for, call him out for. But imagine, he tells this story of what it was like to grow up in his hometown of Luton. Girls being raped. People that are spitting on soldiers that are coming back from the war. People hanging up signs after 9/11 praising the 9/11 hijackers. Gangs of people beating the crap out of you when you were in elementary school. And you go to the police, and what do the police do? They treat you like the criminal. Then along comes this group like the EDL. And they're like, yeah, man, we hear you. Join us. We'll look out for you. You're going to get a lot of people that will join that group because they feel like they don't have a voice anywhere else. So if we really, one of the best steps to stopping white supremacy is stopping identitarian politics in general. By the way, if a white supremacist is watching this, all those groups who hate like the Black Panthers and Black Lives Matter, you know what really drives membership in those organizations? You feed off each other. You identitarian politics all suck. You all suck. And you drive each other. It's a symbiotic relationship. The more hate in one side leads to more hate in the other. So if we want to end it, yes, you go after them. Use law enforcement to go after them, especially if they're engaged in criminal behavior. Only if they're engaged in criminal behavior, I would say. But yes, we should focus on... I have no problem when we saw like specific Islamic churches where, terrorists were coming out of law enforcement heavily looking into those churches. I feel the same way about white nationalist organizations. They should be heavily scrutinized. Absolutely. I feel the same way about Antifa. Yes, they should be heavily looked at. But other things we could do is, tell me this. If I were to say, hey, I'm starting a university and one of my curriculum, one of my majors is all about how horrible blackness is. Black people commit all these crimes, they have all sorts of problems. So we're going to have a major in why blackness is bad. Your jaw would drop. You would say, are you nuts? How bigoted is that? My school would be shut down immediately. There'd be riots and protests. But we see exactly that with white people. Exactly that. Now, I'm not one of these... I don't care about being white. I don't care at all. I'm not one of these people that are crying about white genocide. I don't care. If white people would cease to... If all white people would not have children from here on out, I'd be sad because I have a lot of... I would someday like to have kids and things like that. But to me, the skin color or the background means so little to me. What matters is people that share like kind of my ideas, my cultural beliefs. Skin color and your ethnicity, that's just one factor that could lead to... It's the same argument that I have with this diversity is awesome crowd on the left. Why is diversity awesome? Well, it's because diversity of thought is great. Diversity of opinion and action. Yes, you're right, that is great. Skin color or ethnicity is just one factor that may lead to diversity of thought. But if you have a room full of people of different skin colors and they all share the same thought, that diversity means nothing. It's the same with this, white genocide. I don't care. So what if everyone was white? Well, only white people reproduce, but they all become a bunch of, we're against personal liberty and we want massive government control over all of your life. Okay, I don't care. I don't care that they share the same skin color as me. It's irrelevant. I don't care at all. So to me, I don't care. I'm not one of these people that care about white genocide. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to point out the truth when you see, and this isn't white genocide. I shouldn't be trying to conflate the two. That's not what I'm trying to do. But it might seem that way. I'm just saying, when you have, in the mainstream vernacular, that you have people like Marianne Williamson, who's running for president, leading prayers to apologize for being white, when you still have discussions of reparations, of white people owing something to this country, you see this over and over and over, and it's increasing. The same with men. The patriarchy's evil. You're born evil, right? You have some kind of original sin. When you see this over and over and over again, guess what that does? Guess what one of the side effects are? You increase the kind of nutter white supremacist people, right? Isn't that predictably what happens? That is why, no matter what the injustices this country or any country have done, and there are too numerous to count, the best chance we have of getting along as a society from here forward is to wipe the slate clean as much as possible and say, we're not going to look at past errors. We're not going to judge you as a victim or as an oppressor for something your ancestors you never met 4 generations ago did. We're not going to give special laws based on people's races or based on people's sexuality or based on people's gender. None of that. It's all crap. Every time you do that and you try to solve, you increase animosity and division. That's all that happens. So we have to wipe the slate clean. And guess what will happen? My prediction is, and this is why I think that the Republican Party should be pushing this message to demographics they don't normally reach. If you start to treat people and say, we treat you the exact same as every other race, we treat your geographical area. Now, granted, geographic's a little different because local governments should be enacting different policies that best benefit the local community. But if we go into the inner city and say, we're going to stop saying that you're a victim, we're going to stop the war on poverty policies, we're going to stop incentivizing single motherhood, we're going to stop making ridiculous claims that like, oh, you need advantages, you can't be as smart as other people so you could get into colleges with lower test scores, or you need different disciplinary standards in school because you're somehow different and so you shouldn't be punished for the same things that other people are punished. If you did that for a generation or two, guess what? You might just be surprised that all these black people that are treated in these inner cities start kicking your butt and start doing things, achieving great levels of education. We already see it. We see the people that kind of broke out of that shell are doing awesome. And I say this all the time. If someone told me every day of my life, you're a victim, Rob, everything bad that happened to you is not your fault, everyone owes you something, I'd be a snot-nosed person. I wouldn't do crap. So I'm not judging these people in the inner city at all. But that's the best chance we have. And one of the side effects is when you keep propping up, this group is evil, this group has some sort of historic evil. We're only going to focus on the evils of this one group. The people in that group, if you play identity politics against them, will predictably start playing identity politics themselves. That's just the way it is. And so you're contributing, if you're playing... Yes, I would say the same thing. Dib says, disagrees about white people existing. Would you say the same thing about not caring if they're no longer blacks? Yes, I absolutely would. Don't care. Irrelevant to me. Absolutely irrelevant. To see a culture wiped out is bad, right? To see, like, if we saw Germanic cultures no longer expressed, that would be bad, right? But that's not a skin color or ethnicity thing. And it's so far down the list of things I care about. I don't care. I don't at all. I mean, this racial purity, if somehow we woke up tomorrow and we were all the same shade, I wouldn't care at all. Why is it that I'm connected to someone just because they happen to be the same color as me? I have no clue. I have more in common with, there weren't many, but the black kids I knew in my small rural Pennsylvania, I have far more in common with them because we grew up in the same area, came from a similar economic situation, we liked the same teams, you know? Far more in common with them with some white guy in New York. Right? So what's the skin color happening? I mean, I guess you could say marginally, oh, I have some sort of slight connection, but I just don't care at all. So, I don't know, that's my rant, and I think that the more you see this divisive rhetoric, the more you see, Trump supporters are all racist, we need to stop Trump supporters from gathering, Trump supporters are for mass shootings. The more you see stuff like this, the more you're actually going to see violence occur, or those identitarians from the other side occur. Let me check my message real quick. But yeah, so that's what I have to say there. Now, let's specifically then about the El Paso shooter. One of the things, if you saw my last video on this, one of the things I saw is people were talking about the rhetoric specifically and how that was rhetoric that Donald Trump mirrored. We can't judge people for that. And if we are, then we have to look at the rhetoric in the manifesto as a whole. And the mental gymnastics that you see people jump through to say, no, we should only look at parts of the manifesto and judge people based on that is unbelievable. Unbelievable. The guy did say things like there's an invasion. Okay, you could believe that. I believe that. You could believe that and still not advocate for violence. He also said that there's a problem with corporations. You could believe that and not advocate for violence. That happens to be more of a left-wing position. He also said there's a problem with environmentalism and people are living in this country beyond their means and it's going to destroy the environment. And we need to have less people in the world in order to sustain the environment. That's rhetoric that we hear from the left all the time. But you could believe that and still not advocate for violence. So the argument is, what people are trying to do is, they're trying to win the political argument. Because many of them are open borders, and they don't want the borders solved. They said there was no crisis, remember that? There was no crisis. They voted against funding all of these people. They walked into these facilities and said, it's a shame there's no beds here for these people, when they were the ones who voted against sending the money for beds. Right? They said it was a lie. There was no crisis. Then when it was politically expedient for them, they said, oh, no, now there is a crisis, and it's all Trump's fault. Right? That's what they said. Now these same people are saying, by the way, you can't have Trump's side of this position or you're justifying mass shootings. So sacrifice your beliefs. You have to support our open border agenda or else you're in favor of mass shootings because of the actions of this extremist. Well, if that's the type of argumentation we're going to have, we're lost as a country, because I could say, by the way, for all you people that want the Green New Deal and are concerned about climate change, you're parroting the rhetoric of this extremist shooter, and therefore you have to be against climate change legislation and things like that now, or else you're supporting mass shootings. Of course, you would be laughed out of the room for saying that, as you should be, but because the establishment Democrats that are for the open borders control all of the cultural institutions of power, they control the narrative. So they're able to say, yes, see, that's what it's about. It's not just about demonizing Trump, it's about demonizing that policy position. They want you to, it's the same with Second Amendment. They want you to give that up. We will shame you. We will make personal attacks on you. We'll release your information to the public. We'll encourage mobs to yell at you. We'll do everything we can within our power to call you out as an individual. Not you, the politician. You as the individual. Until you give up and say, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. My position is evil. And it's not evil. It's not only not evil, it is actually the compassionate thing to do. Because if we have total open borders, all kinds of insanity will happen. One, it affects low-income people in the United States, particularly black Americans, more than anyone else, by directly competing with their labor. Second, it'll strain our healthcare system. Isn't it funny with illegal immigration? I wanted to do a video, but I got so busy, where they keep saying, it doesn't affect our health system at all. Then the argument that I saw people make, particularly a Democratic strategist on Tucker, when we started to see Bernie and others saying, well, actually, we'll give health care to the illegals here. It's the moral thing to do. What was the argument then? What did it morph to? Well, actually, that would be preventative care. And that would save us money because the illegals are right now using the emergency rooms, which cost so much money. Whoops, I thought it didn't cost money. Just like I've seen these same Democrats say, well, we wouldn't have a problem right now if Trump would have just, had Mexico pay for the wall. Oh, so you're admitting the wall works. You just didn't want to spend the money for it. Just listen to these open borders people talk long enough and they out themselves. But anyways, also we know that when we signal for open borders that gives the advantage to all these coyotes and drug dealers and cartel members that are raping as many of 1/3 of the people according to human rights organizations that are trying to cross. And if we had unlimited open borders, as is being suggested, not only would it bankrupt the country, it would destroy environmental resources and things like that. Now you might say, you're parroting the rhetoric of this mass shooter. No, I'm not. This is a mass shooter that just happened to be an insane psychopath racist that used this as an excuse. And if I'm not allowed to say that because that's what that shooter believed, then you're not allowed to talk about climate change. Then where are we? Boy, it'd be real simple all of a sudden, right, to get people to be on your political side. All you need to do is find some killer that's going to go out there and say, hey, I killed in the name of X, therefore no one could advocate X. Now let's look specifically at what this manifesto said. The first thing he does is, and don't get me wrong, I'm here to tell you right now, seems like a racist to me. And I will talk about whether or not that's right wing or not. But certainly, I have no problem condemning him. He shared some of my beliefs on at least wanting to see illegal immigration solved. He just took it to a disgusting place. It doesn't mean, it's the old Hitler wore pants and I wear pants, The guy that shut up the Bernie field doesn't mean that, he shut up, so now people can't want to keep Obamacare. He wanted to keep Obamacare, and he tried to kill people, so now if you want to keep Obamacare, you're trying to kill people. You're advocating for trying to kill people. That's so stupid, and everybody knows it. But the very first thing he says is that he basically is like, I kind of rushed this, and I'm basically, I figured any manifesto is better than no manifesto, and so basically I agree with the Christchurch guy. Okay, what did the Christchurch shooter say? He basically admits to being a troll. The Christchurch shooter specifically said, and again, I think the Christchurch shooter was a racist. I definitely think that. I believe he was anti-Muslim, and that should be condemned. But to me, it seemed like he was specifically saying, hey, listen, both you people on the left and the right, I'm going to throw red meat to both of you. And I said this earlier, but I'm going to throw red meat to both of you because I know both of you can't help but to attack the other side with it. And so I'm trying to push, I know this will lead to a conversation on gun control, and the left will pick that up and advocate for that, and that's what I want to see. And Chuck, I already talked about, that we shouldn't give up our rights because of a few extremists. But, so basically what the Christchurch shooter was saying was like, I know that I could it's not just that the shooting will cause a massive impact, because it did. Everyone who died and their family, of course, their lives are changed forever. But the greater ripple effect will be that the people that talk about the shooting can't help themselves. They will take this manifesto, which I'm admitting to you up front. I'm basically including things that I know both sides will latch on to. And that will cause even more division and attack. Like the Joker from The Dark Knight. Right? He sets up the conditions for the two boats to blow each other up, which was stupid. You can't convince me that neither of those boats would have tried to blow the other one up. But anyways, that type of... setting up the conditions to leave us eat ourselves, basically. And predictably, that's exactly what happens. So if you're really trying to go against what the killers believe, you don't just say, the killers were for solving illegal immigration, therefore, if to be against them, you can no longer focus on illegal immigration. If you really wanted to go against them, you would say, I'm not going to leave these insane extremists dictate my political beliefs. Period. But no, instead, so now we have the absurd argument. Now we can't look. See, and the reasons are, okay, well, he clearly shot people because he was racist, not because of climate change, so the climate change stuff's irrelevant. No. Because the reason it's relevant, you said his specific rhetoric mirrored that of Donald Trump when he talked about it was an invasion. And we only know that from the manifesto. Now, I've had many people tell me, but what did the police say? The police said they're investigating it as a hate crime. So that's all that matters. It's a hate crime. That's it. It's racism. That's it. Nothing else matters. The same article, the police said, also, we're looking at the manifesto as the nexus for his actions. What does he say in the manifesto? Left-leaning positions, like about climate change and urban sprawl and corporations being bad. Again, I'm not saying, because people keep trying to smear it this way, I'm not saying the people that have a problem with corporations or with climate change or with urban sprawl are responsible for this shooter. I'm saying those people that are blaming Trump and his supporters for the shooting because of the illegal immigration part are hypocrites if they don't blame the people that have these other parts. And so then, now, as I kind of previewed earlier, now what I hear is this. Actually, eco-fascism's a right-wing thing. It's right-wing. So, actually, even the environmental parts, that's all right-wing. This is something clever that's done, and again, I was talking about controlling definitions. What does right and left-wing mean? You see this all the time. I've had people tell me straight up, not Mao's China, the Soviet Union, that's right-wing governments. They literally define any government that ever acted any evil action is right-wing, and any government that ever did good is left-wing. That's their definition. It's just like when you talk to feminists, like, can you please define masculinity versus femininity? Oh, masculinity is like evil and violence and horribleness, and femininity is caring and honesty and intellect. So you basically just said bad things are bad and good things are good. Yeah. I could make the case. We could talk about what is right and left wing. There are questions of historically, what does it mean? What measure are we using? For example, my favorite interpretation is Jordan Peterson's, where he talks about right wings are people that understand hierarchies exist and understand the importance of them. Left wing are people that say, yes, the hierarchies exist, but we need to recognize that if we don't constantly evaluate them, competency won't lead to the highest tier, it will be corruption, and we also have to look out to the people below the hierarchy. That to me is a good definition of left and right to me. But you've had people that have said like all sorts of things. Left is more collectivist, right is more left is I don't know. It's all in how you define it. I hear people from Europe telling me all the time, there are no left-wing people in the United States. It's just right-wing and more right-wing. But it's funny, and granted, there are people on the right that do this as well. But again, I see this, and I admit, I'm biased, I see this occur far more on the left, where people want to act like, it's the same with the no true Scotsman's fallacy in socialism. Oh, what about this socialist? Can you name me, let's go through socialist countries that ended up hellholes, that ended up abusing their people, that failed miserably. Oh, no, that's not real socialism. Oh, no, it's not the left. That was the right. Anytime something bad happened, it was the right. I had someone tell me the difference is this. The right is anytime there's a singular leader, and the left is anytime it's a collective group. So Mao and Stalin and Hitler, that's all right-wing. And I'm like, well, can you name me a bad left-wing group? No. I mean, it's craziness. And it's transparently used to just score political points. So I had someone tell me, well, eco-fascism is actually a right-wing thing. Okay, why? Well, because here's an article from a bunch of people on Reddit saying we're white supremacists and we're also concerned about the environment. Couldn't I easily say, oh, that just means racism's a left-wing thing? They've taken a clearly leftist policy. We could look back to the Weather Underground and other environmental terrorist groups that are all coming from a position of left. So these leftists have taken that and just added racism. Therefore, that means that the racism's that they're left-wing racist. Oh, no. Because racism's always right-wing, and so that's always right-wing, and so any position you adapt that's terrible with that also is a right-wing position now. I could easily say, to me, when we look at today, what is the difference between the right and the left? The prevailing difference and the most important difference to me seems to be the right seems to be a party of individualism, and the left seems to be that of collectivism. Okay? The left plays identity politics. So if we have a bunch of white nationalists, what does that sound more like? That sounds like identity politics to me. So I could easily say, well, that's left-wing. The point is, it's stupid and nonsense anyways. Who the hell cares? I'm already of the position that these extremists aren't indicative of the other people that the groups that they claim to be in, Republican, Democrat, left, right. I already said that. So what does it matter if they're on the right or the left? Why should I be judged because some white supremacist when I'm vehemently against it? Well, because he's on the same side of the political aisle as you. According to who? I say he's on the same side as you. Now what? It's so stupid. We're talking specifically about the rhetoric. If you are so dishonest that you say, I just said this to you, hey, some guy did something. Oh, yeah, what did he do? Well, never mind that right now. Let me tell you a little about this guy. The first thing you need to know about this guy is he's very concerned about climate change. He thinks that we only have a few years to do something, and he thinks that the way Americans live is disgusting and it's destroying the environment. Now, what party do you think he'd be more likely to vote for? And if you can't tell me right now, you'd honestly say, seems like you might vote Democrat. I could be wrong, but that seems to be more of a Democrat position. Of course it is. But to then say, oh, wait, he's a racist too? Oh, then he must be a racist. Then now environmentalism, that's a right-wing position. If your claim is, no, being super concerned about climate change is a right-wing position, then I guess your argument is all the people that are concerned about climate change are right-wing. So Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez. And so now, what does that change? Does that change anything at all? No, nothing at all. If the guy would have said everything he said in his manifesto and then added one sentence at the end, by the way, I'm a Democrat, I'm voting for Bernie Sanders. Does that mean all of a sudden, everything he said is a left-wing thing, everything he said, it's Bernie's fault? No. This is so stupid. And everybody knows it. Everyone knows it. Who cares what the definition of right and left wing is? I'm so sick and tired of, well, the Nazis were left wing, they were right wing. Well, actually, this was left or this was right wing. What is the relevance to any of this? When we talk about extremists, we can say, what are the trends that we can see that lead to extremism? That's fine. But arbitrary terms like left and right or patriarchy or whiteness or blackness, it's all nonsense. And it is used by people to try to attack people they see as political opponents. Period. That's the reason that that's brought up. I don't care how you define the Democrats or the Republicans, left wing, right wing. You might say the Democrats are also right wing. Okay, fair enough, whatever. There are extremists who come from the Democratic Party, there are extremists who come from the Republican Party. What does the left and right, what does that do anything? You're just trying to get another category. You're like trying to draw that Venn diagram, like, okay, here's the killer. What circle can I put that goes around him and my political opponents that I can connect them to the most? I could draw that circle the same way to try to connect you and your... It's stupid. It doesn't solve anything. And what it does is it actually makes the situation worse. Because now we see real people saying insane things that would have never flown. Things that if Republicans would say would rightfully be condemned in the strongest possible terms. All of our opponents' followers are racist. All of them support mass shootings. They should not be allowed to gather in public. Let me publish the names of the donors of my opponents so that they could be harassed and mobbed. If that was being done by the right, it would be game over. We see, what do we, look at the other insanity. We see the New York Times. It's supposed to be the bastion, the pinnacle of journalism. That's what we're told. Remember all these journalists that give themselves award and they have White House Correspondents' Dinner and they talk about how important they are and how Trump's rhetoric's a danger to them and now they're the backbone of our country and without them, democracy dies in darkness and the press is such an important thing. Free, independent journalism. And the New York Times is our, the shining city on the hill. The greatest example of us. What do we see happen with them this week? They have a factual headline of just what Trump said. Not an opinion, just what Trump said in their front page. And they were forced to change it because the left and Democrats running for president demanded that they change the headline. Nate Silver came out and said, oh, of course, is this a shock to anyone? A corporation did what their people that support them wanted them to do. You're right, Nate. That's what people like me have been saying. There is no free press. It's garbage. The mainstream media that tells us how important they are liars. They're cheerleaders. They're mouthpieces for the establishment Democratic Party. That happened today. Or this week. Now, if you would have told people, free press advocates in the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, hey, by the way, you know how weak the press is going to become? You know how disingenuous they're going to become? If their readers don't like a factual headline they'll say, please forgive us and change it. The New York Times. That's what happened this week. But no big deal. The same people that are demanding, we demand Trump disavow white supremacy. Okay, I disavow white supremacy. Not good enough. Oh, okay, by the way, do you guys disavow the terrorists that attacked the ICE facility that parroted your language? How dare you? How dare you even bring that up? We're not even going to dignify that with a response. I mean, yeah, it would be... I feel what you're saying, DJ, about not wanting political parties. The problem is, we as humans, a political party is basically a label, and it's almost impossible to go through life without using labels. You're going to have like-minded people gather, and there's going to be a label put on that gathering. And political parties just happen to be it. But I always say this. Even when I ran for Republican, and I'll say this to anyone and any time, and I probably will run as a Republican again for Congress, I will never be a party-first person, ever. And here's why. There is no one in this world that shares my exact political thoughts. And by extension of that, there is no political party that shares my exact thoughts politically. And so I will never kowtow to what my party tells me that I have to think. That is less important to me than the ideas. So yeah, the political parties, people have this tendency to want to have this tribal mentality that say well, my team's okay to do this, but the other team... But I don't know how to eliminate the parties. I mean, all through human society, even various forms of government, we see political parties spring up, or the equivalent of them, and labels be put on it. So I don't know how to end it. All we can do as individuals is say, I'm not who my party is. I happen to be a member of this party, but that doesn't mean that I leave them dictate what to think to me, or I'm unwilling to call out my party if they do something I think's wrong, which is exactly what I say about Trump. I support Trump. I support Trump, I think, in a pretty reasonable way, an intelligent way, and definitely in a voracious way, all the time on here. Yet I call him out when I feel. I think his budget spending's ridiculous. I thought him bombing Syria is ridiculous. I think a lot of his tweets are ridiculous. The fact he tried to blame video games this week was ridiculous. A lot of the people he pointed were terrible people. He said he put the best people around him. You know, I call him out all the time. I don't care because I'm not interested in the cult of personality. I have my thoughts. I say things on here. Like Dibs told me several times he disagrees with me on things here. That's cool. Some of my best friends are socialists. That's cool. That's fine. That's great. That's the type of diversity I like. We should disagree with each other. But yeah, this tribalism from the political parties, it's just like, it's insane. So now we talked about the El Paso shooter. Let's talk about the Dayton shooter. Now the Dayton shooter, turns out, called the Antifa terrorist a martyr. Boy, wouldn't it have been nice if the left would have called out that terrorist? They didn't. Not one Democrat president was even asked that I saw. None of them called it out. The people in the squad that directly used the same language calling these places concentration camps, right? They were asked point blank several times to condemn it. They didn't. So now we see someone who goes out and kills a bunch of people. First thing to know about him, he says that person was a great person. He defends Antifa all the time. Talks about supporting Elizabeth Warren. Talks about being a socialist. Right? Yeah, that Trump speech was ridiculous. I agree. Now, what the left is saying is, instead of just saying, how hard is this? First, let's go back to the Antifa terrorists that attacked the ICE facility. How hard is it to just say, yeah, of course we're against this violence. We do think these are terrible facilities and they need shut down. But if you think that the way you go about that is violence, you're horribly wrong. We condemn you in the strongest possible terms. That's it. And then you go about your day. The fact you're unwilling to do that, it's the same with Antifa. All the times we saw Antifa acting terribly, all those people had to say was like, yeah, it's terrible. Even if you want to say, yeah, it's terrible, but I don't think it's as bad as white supremacy. I mean, that's a cop-out, but fine. Then that's something to his credit, David Packman said that I saw say. And I'm okay with that. I understand we're all biased in some way and we're all going to try to defend our side. But at least he called out and says, that it's terrible. That's great. That's what you should be doing. But they couldn't even be bothered to do that. People, Antifa, it's anti-fascist. It's in the name. And, sometimes violence is okay. Sometimes you have to punch a Nazi. Okay, so we have this person do this. Now, instead of the left just coming out and saying, look, we don't think that the investigation isn't over. By the way, this is true of the El Paso shooting. I know are we 100% positive that the El Paso shooter wrote that manifesto? I don't know. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But, what do we, how hard would it just be? We don't know what the results of the investigation will be. But if he did, it appears that he was someone who said he supported this ICE terrorist and someone who thought that, he shared socialist views or views of those on the left. We condemn this violence in the strongest possible terms. We're not saying that was the reason for his motivation, but anyone who thinks that our beliefs and who we are as a party or who we are as a political ideology supports this type of violence is absolutely ridiculous and we're against it. But remember, I already told you people that are on the left, that are supposedly voices of the left with thousands of followers, like Destiny, he says, yes, you are morally justified to kill conservatives if they're voting for policies like the ICE detention facilities. So is it any surprise? It's not just, how is that rhetoric not directly, shouldn't be directly condemned? You're basically on the side of the shooter. But anyways, they didn't say that, did they? What they're saying instead is, here's the thing. We don't have a reason for the motivation, so we can't say it was left. Just because he happened to be left-wing doesn't mean that him being left-wing was the reason for the shooting. Well, okay. Why did you then, when Gifford was shot, but I think Lochner shot her, same thing, he was a psychopathic schizophrenic. Yet, what did Bernie Sanders and all the Democrats say? Well, they fundraised off it, and they blamed right-wing rhetoric. It didn't matter that he was a total clinical psychopath that we could see, that it had nothing to do with politics. That didn't matter at all, did it? That's the way it always works. So why the double standard? Why? Oh, if anyone says something and says, yeah, I'll get to that in a second, Joe. If anyone says, something bad while they're wearing a MAGA hat, it's even if it has nothing to do with politics. Well, that's because Trump. That's because Trump. He's a Trump supporter, so it must be because of Trump. But when it's someone on their side, all of a sudden it's different. And I find that to just be it just shows the hypocrisy in the political gamesmanship. And if your first thought in a tragedy is, I need to use this as a political weapon to achieve my political goals, you're not being a moral person. You're disgusting. And you're probably acting as a hypocrite, as we can see. Now, yeah, and this is a good question, Joe. People say, wasn't the country founded through revolution and political violence? Well, yes. Here's the truth about political violence. You can sometimes justify it, but you better be damn sure that you're right. And the problem is, there's almost no way of knowing that you're right. With that wasn't political violence as an act of, I'm an individual that's upset with this policy, so I'll kill my elected leader. That was actually going through the process of declaring a war. That political violence is very different. So if you, or someone who's unhappy with Trump, want to try to secede, try to raise a military, okay, so be it. But if your solution is, I'm just going to go kill ICE facility soldiers, or I'm Antifa and I'm just going to bash anyone that supports Trump, or we need to kill conservatives, that's clearly unacceptable. That sort of political violence of, a revolution taking over a country is far different. And the problem is, and people say this all the time, well, the revolution, or how about this, if you were in Germany and Hitler was there, don't you think it would have behooved you to go ahead and attack, to stop Hitler? If you're 100% sure you're fighting Hitler, sure, but you're not. And for every one time there's a Hitler, there are millions upon millions of times that people would use that exact excuse to enact violence on people that disagreed with them that weren't like Hitler. We see it happen in real time. Terrorists attacking ICE facilities. Not to mention, is it not only immoral, but it's also not strategic. Right? And I talk about this all the time. Sometimes you can't convince people of what you think they're doing that's immoral. So you also talk about it strategically. Do you think that Antifa's helping their cause when they go out and they have a terrorist attack in an ICE facility? Do you think more people are going to be like, yeah, Antifa, they got some good ideas? Do you think when Black Lives Matter, when a member of them goes out and shoots 4 cops in Dallas and kills them, do you think people are like, okay, yeah, I get it now. They're shooting and killing cops. Now it makes sense. Now, I was on the fence, but of course not. So strategically, it's a mistake as well. But certainly it's immoral. Once you give the justification for political violence, here's a good lesson, right? Anything that you advocate in the political realm, you should always assume, what if my opponents had the same power? So if I say, I'm for the FISA courts, and I think it's perfectly fine that they spied on Trump and people connected to him, then you, in order to be moral and legitimate and not a hypocrite, have to say, and I have no problem if Trump uses those powers to spy on his opponents. If you're unwilling to give Trump those powers, then you should be unwilling for people to do it towards Trump. By the same definition, if you could say, I give myself the justification for political violence under a certain circumstance, you better also give your opponent the same type of justification. And then what's the world look like? What's the country look like then? You have a bunch of people that say, we think the government's trying, right-wing people that'll say something like, the government's trying to take our guns. We need to defend it to the death. You have a bunch of people on the left saying, these people are all mass shooters, racist. We're morally justified in having violence. That's not going to look good. The reason the Antifa is getting more followers isn't that those actions specifically garner them more followers. It's that they are celebrated, ignored, or winked and nodded to by people in the mainstream. If you continue to look, it's this old idea. I can't remember where I heard this from, but it's the idea of slaying dragons, right? We as a society, what is our big battle? If you're interested in social justice, what's your big battle today? You look back at the civil rights movement, and you see police attacking marchers with water hoses and dogs, and people getting assassinated like MLK. And you want that. You want that bravery in that battle. So then what's your battle? Well, the Patriot Prayer Group that wants to pray. They're the guys with the fire out. They're the Nazis. Right? You want to continue that battle. You want to be, like the great heroes of yesteryear. But the battle's not there. So you end up doing gendered pronouns and trans activism and all this insanity. And we need to beat people. We can't leave conservatives. We got to, got to stop conservatives from gathering in line. Here's the other thing, right? Let's we see how this works in the public sphere. But look how it works in the private sphere. All of Silicon Valley, all the media, all of academia. Just reverse the political parties. Reverse, right? And say the same things. I don't think Democrats should be allowed to. I think we should throw milkshakes on all Democrats until they're afraid to organize in public. Think that'll get you banned from Twitter? Think that'll be defended by a bunch of mainstream people? But just switch out the word Democrat with Republican and, okay, yeah, no problem. And then someone gets beaten and attacked with the first thing that happened to them, milkshake thrown on, no problem. But when that same person says, this person called me, even though my name's Gay Wonk, this person made fun of my sexuality. Well, they get punished. Google and YouTube and Twitter have the potential to influence millions upon millions of minds. And they're being ran by people that have no problem with the left advocating violence. But they'll censor right-wing views left and right. Or demonetize them, or whatever. And people say, well, it's not just the left. That's true. They also are censoring anti-establishment left-wing people. Which, by the way, is why Tulsi Gabbard's being gone after so strongly. That's what I wanted to do my video on this week until the shootings happened, was last week after you saw post-debate when Tulsi shredded Kamala Harris. What's Kamala Harris's comeback? Russia. She's Russian. Tulsi's a Russian spy. A bunch of people in the media jump on that too. Now I told all my left-leaning friends, I said, be careful what you wish for with this Russia hoax, because when you actually get an anti-establishment person on the left, someone that would be anti-war that maybe you'd be against, they're going to be smeared with the same token, the same tactic. No, it would never happen. And I give you Tulsi Gabbard. Sometimes it's scary how fast these things happen. Be careful what you wish for. It's like, maybe 10, 20 years down the road. Nope, 2 years down the road, we'll see it. So we see all of this, all these calls. What do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen when you have mainstream people, mainstream voices saying every person that supports Trump's a racist? Trump's killing people. He's a Nazi. He's locking children in cages. He's literally Hitler. He's a Russian agent. He's got his fingers on the nuclear bomb. We're all dead in 10 years from climate change. When people are bombarded with that. Now, not everyone. There are people on the left that could hear that and they're like, okay, hyperbolic. Most people won't go out and enact violence. But there are some people that will believe it. They'll take it at face value. There are people, politics oftentimes like a WWF or WWE, whatever it's called now, right? Wrestling. They hate each other on camera and then they're having beers behind the scenes. They pretend to disagree about things, but the establishment, people in power in the Republican and Democratic Party, neither of them want to solve illegal immigration. Both of them are for bailing out banks. Both of them are for regime change wars. Both of them for blowing up the budget. Right? But they put on that show for you. Just like how there are people that take that show seriously in wrestling, there are going to be people that take that show seriously in politics. And if you really believe this guy is Hitler, all of his followers are white supremacists. They're trying to lynch black and gay people. They want to, it's the Handmaid's Tale. They want to put women in shackles and force them to be sex slaves. We're all going to be dead in 10 years because of their climate change policy. They don't want anyone to have access to any health care. If you're told that enough times, what do? Well, you go out and vote, but then maybe your party doesn't win. Now what? So in that sense, we should be careful about our rhetoric. But I don't see Trump saying anything even close to the hyperbolic nature that we see the left talking about. Trump's talking about a problem with illegal immigration. That exists. It's true. Just like there are very reasonable people that are talking about problems with climate change, but they ain't saying, and I'm certain we're all dead in 10 years. They're saying it's a problem. Each year it could get worse. We need to start trying to change things now. That's very different than saying we're all dead in 18 months, like people are saying. When you put things in those terms, and you know you're wrong, you know you don't have the evidence to back that up. It's no different than when we lied ourselves into wars. Gotta go into Iraq. Gotta go. They're gonna kill us all. Gotta go into Libya. Have to do it. Oh, gotta go into Afghanistan. Gotta do it. Vietnam, gotta go. Right? It's the same type of fear-mongering crap. People believe it. And if you say it enough, and then the political machinations don't occur, people will take it into their own hands. Now, that's not to say that violence wouldn't happen if they're not saying that. Of course not. I'm just saying you're raising the conditions for violence and division to occur. People say Trump could be more uniting. I guess. So could the left. It's a what came first, the chicken or the egg? I seem to remember under Obama and years before them, the media all being dominated by the establishment left wing. I seem to remember them using everyone's a racist. Mitt Romney was a racist. John McCain was a racist. George Bush was a racist. Right? They said that over and over and over again. But I'm supposed to just ignore that and say, no, don't start it with Trump. What happened was you bullied and you attacked people that were conservatives and Republicans so much, and that's cultural institutions of power that control the public narrative were dominated by the establishment left so much that people on the right were like, we're going to pick someone who will fight back. That's why people like my dad, that never voted in his life, voted for Donald Trump. It wasn't because they had a lot in common. Trump a billionaire, my dad has, been relatively poor his entire life. No, people like my dad felt like, I'm tired of being told that I'm privileged because of my gender or my skin color when I'm busting my butt, working 50, 60 hours a day, barely scraping by, and I'm constantly told how terrible I am and how horrible I am, and I'm the butt of every joke. And here comes a guy that's like, you know what? I don't think you're horrible. I think you're the backbone of this country, and I'm going to give them the same crap they've been giving you. Yes, Trump goes overboard sometimes. And yes, I would like to see him unite more. But I'd like to have seen Obama unite more too. Do you think it was cool when a BLM member shot 4 police officers in Dallas and then Obama went to the funeral and did he say, my God, this is terrible? Yeah, he said that, but he also said, and the police need to be careful about being racist. They got to work better with the black community. How would you feel if your husband or your dad or your kid died, in the line of duty by some black supremacist psychopath, and the president came to the funeral and started to lecture people like your son on how they treat people like the black supremacist psychopath? How would that make you feel? Oh, I didn't know that was you, Dustin. Now, that doesn't mean we should excuse anything, that Trump's beyond criticism. Far from it. I criticize him all the time. But I'm sick and tired of this narrative that that's the only place the divisive rhetoric's coming from. Haven't heard Trump attack supporters of any of his followers. Hear that all the time from many prominent people. But starting with Hillary Clinton, 50% of Trump supporters were deplorable or racist. Establishment people, sometimes it's morally justified to kill conservative people. Yes, we can attack conservatives. Yes, we need to physically assault conservatives so they're afraid to gather in public. Yes, we need to it's okay if you see a conservative at a restaurant to surround them and scream at them, even with their wife and kids, or if they're at an airport. Same thing, it's okay. It's okay to go to Tucker Carlson's house or Mitch McConnell's house and threaten violence on them. That's perfectly fine. That's not considered divisive rhetoric. But Trump saying that Baltimore's a rat-infested hole. Oh my God! Racism! That's racism! Even though we know Cummings himself said that. Even though we know the mayor of Baltimore said that. Even though we know Bernie Sanders said that. Equivalent things. Nope, they weren't racist, just Trump. And it's the same garbage over and over. I talk a lot about the Russia thing. We have to listen to these people talk before the shootings ad nauseum 24/7 that Trump obstructed justice because of mean tweets and because he fired Comey, even though Rosenstein was the one who recommended he fire Comey. That's obstruction of justice. But the same people won't breathe one word on Hillary Clinton's team deleted subpoenaed evidence. A far more egregious and blatant example of obstruction of justice. They tell us divisive rhetoric when Trump's saying we need to do something about illegal immigration, but calling all Trump supporters racist isn't. They literally, and like you could come up with hypotheticals like, well, where you kind of stretch it out, kind of a slippery slope argument. What more is there to say? They defended black adult racists called the Hebrew Israelites that were screaming at kids just because the kids had a MAGA hat on and they were white. So black adult racists can make homophobic, threatening, racial slurs to children as long as they're black and the children are Trump supporters and are white. What more can you say? That happened. The kids got death threats. The media knew the story was wrong. And after the kids got death threats and knew the media knew they were wrong, did they say, well, we apologize and we're going to drop that now? No, instead they said, oh, and here was a basketball game from 6 years ago before those kids were even in that school where a kid painted himself black, so that's blackface and that proves it. Oh, and then they didn't leave a gay valedictorian speak. Oops, it turns out that wasn't the right school, and it had nothing to do with the kid being gay. It was because he didn't meet the time schedule and the length required to be able to speak. Imagine that. I see a bunch of adult KKK members or neo-Nazis screaming at black children. I have a national platform. Let's say maybe I become a big YouTuber, millions of people watching, A big corporation making millions of bucks to report the news. Supposedly I'm trustworthy. And my argument is to say, no, I'm going to defend the neo-Nazis. Screw these kids. Did you see the smirk that black kid had? And then it turns out, a video comes out that shows that it was actually all opposite. And so what do? I say, oh, okay, sorry about that. But did you see how bad these other black kids at their school are? Did you see that? People would call me a disgusting, bigoted racist. They'd be right. But that was almost all of our media, wasn't it? No, Chuck, I do think it's a soft civil war. I think that it's going to get worse. I think that the reason is when you silence and marginalize people, like, why did the civil rights movement explode? It's because you can only push people so far, right? You can only marginalize people so far. And so when you take an entire group of people that's not with this crazy agenda, and it's crazy, and we see that, and that's one of the reasons I say I voted for Trump. He outed the craziness from the media and from the Democrats. I mean, for God's sakes, we had New York City. I'm not even one to get into abortion politics that much. We have New York City lighting up the skyline in celebration for the fact that women can now have abortions at 9 months for any reason. We had a governor of Virginia tell us that, even after a child's born, if the woman didn't want it, that we need to you make the child comfortable and then have a serious discussion as to whether or not to continue the child. We have people saying they're not for open borders, but they want to make it so it's not a crime, it's just a civil offense, meaning you have to pay a fine. And they never want to use that as a reason to send you back. And they don't want to detain you. And they want to give you health care. And they want to give you free education. We have people saying there is no biological difference between men and women at all. And that if you say there is, you're kicked off of social media. And that it's bigoted to state obvious scientific truths. That's the prevailing narrative. That's the position of power right now. If you disagree with that, you're a racist. You're a bigot. If you're attacked, did you see the guy in New York, the shop owner, his face was all swelled up because he was wearing a MAGA hat? That get much attention. Jussie Smollett, we had a guy, we're told about all this white privilege, yet we have Jussie Smollett. He understands the idea of playing a victim, doesn't he? Where'd the media go with that? Oh, they dropped that real quick, but they pushed it when the hoax was alive and well. Same with that woman in Florida that we now see from surveillance. She said, they told me to go back. It was actually her that said it, according to police reports. How can that be? We're told that all those are disadvantaged. We have people that are knowingly, like Elizabeth Warren. If white privilege is such a thing, wouldn't you be writing on your college application or your application to teach at Harvard, by the way, I'm white? No, instead you have to lie and say, I'm Native American. And if you have a problem with any of this, you're a bigot. You're wrong. And so you don't have a voice on the media. You don't have a voice in academia. You don't have a voice in the entertainment industry. You can't even watch sports anymore without it being thrown in your face. So where do you go? You go to the internet. Now they're censoring you there. So what's going to happen? I mean, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And they're shameless. Like, God forbid the worst happen. God forbid Trump gets assassinated, right? Do you think for a moment that all these people on the left that have said that he called for the mass shooting, he supports the mass shooting, that he's Hitler, he's a Nazi, he's a racist, do you think for a minute any of them would be like, oh my God, maybe I went overboard with my rhetoric and someone took it serious and killed him? No, not for a minute. They'd say, well, that's what he wants and it's his fault. His rhetoric led to this. We don't think it was a good thing he was killed, but his rhetoric led to it. We know that. We see it because we see it happening on lower scales. Gifford gets shot, blame Republican, blame Republican, blame Republican. Bernie supporter shoots Scalise, no comment. Dayton shooter turns out to be Democrat, not much comment. El Paso guy seems to be a racist, blame Republican, blame Republican, blame Republican. Antifa terrorist attacks ICE facility, no comment. That's why it's up to people like, look, you might be watching this. I have tons of, and for those that know me personally, know that I have tons of left-leaning friends. Maybe some of you are left-leaning that are watching right here. That's cool. We can have civil discussions. And it's okay to joke. It's okay to laugh around and have a good time and pick on each other and rib each other and have serious disagreements. But surely you can see how insane this is getting. That's right. They do act without consequences for the exact same things. Right? All the time. Hey, we have to take all sexual assault accusers seriously. Everyone should step down. Lieutenant Governor Fairfax of Virginia, well, not him. Bob Menendez was accused of hiring underage prostitutes, well, not him. Bill Clinton, he was there, well, not him. But any Republican, yeah. Keith Ellison, accused credibly of beating his wife, well, not him. By the way, I agree with all that. All those Democrats should have been given due process. And I was against, even though I dislike him, Al Franken getting the boot. He should have had a chance to defend himself. But the double standards are ridiculous. So, I'm going to end up I have to head out here. I got to get ready. I'm going out for wings tonight. But, yeah, I mean, in conclusion, with this shooting, it's a terrible thing. And we should not be politicizing it. You know? Yeah, I wanted to talk about the Vegas shooter quickly for a minute. And the FBI. This might not be a popular opinion. Probably the folks watching here won't mind, but this is how I honestly believe. I don't take the FBI at their word anymore. I don't trust them at all. Period. They've lied to me over and over and over and over again. So until I see proof from them, I don't believe them. I'm not saying that proves they're lying. I'm not saying that the fact they say something automatically must not be the truth. But I'm sorry, I don't believe them. We can know everything about the El Paso shooter's life immediately. The Dayton shooter, not so much. And the Las Vegas shooter, the biggest mass shooting that happened to target a country music festival, the story changed 50 times, and they're basically just like, yeah, we looked into it and we couldn't find any reason that he would do this. I'm sorry, I don't believe it. And if that's all that the most powerful investigative agency in the history of the world can come up with the biggest mass shooting in the history of our country, then people need to go. They're obviously a worthless organization. Now, does that mean, of course, there could be a crime that's unsolvable by the FBI. With that many discrepancies, that many things that are occurring, that have changed, the story changing over and over, access to all of his hard drives and things like that, and they couldn't come up with anything? They can't even give us a picture of what you mean to tell me with the access to all of his phones and computers, they can't give us a picture of, like, this is a picture of what this guy was like? Instead, they're just like, no, we don't have anything. We have no possible motivations. Leaving his wife basically disappear, or his sister, or whoever it was. You know, so no, I don't believe them. But, yeah, the shooting's terrible, and we shouldn't use it. If your goal, I don't care if you're on the left or the right, is to use this to, a tragedy like this, to achieve your political goals, you're doing things the wrong way, and it's immoral. And I am biased, but I see that happening far, far, far more on the left. And the least you should do is, if you're going to look at rhetoric, if you're going to assign blame based on, oh, this person shared policies of Donald Trump, so Trump and his supporters are to blame, then you better do it when it occurs with the Democrats as well. And they never do. So, well, thanks everyone for listening. I'm going to head out. I'll be putting out more material as the week goes on. I actually have some free time, so I'll try to put up some schedule of some videos. And if anyone would like to be a guest on the show, all you need is a Gmail account, and we can get you hooked up so you can come on with just audio or audio and visual if you want. But please comment. The live chat, maybe not so much, but comment on the video itself. And the last thing I'll ask, I know it's stupid and everyone gets tired of hearing this, but please like and subscribe if you haven't. If I get to 1,000 subscribers, I can actually live stream mobilely, which I want to go to some political events and do that, so I would really appreciate doing that. You can also follow me on BitChute if you're tired of YouTube censoring people, and it's just Robert Knorr on BitChute, and all my videos will be there as well, which you can check out, which I'd really appreciate. And I'm on Twitter at NorRobert. And I hate saying, please follow me, but, you know, I guess that's the nature of the game, so. But thanks, everyone, for listening. I really appreciate it, and have a good one.